Hello, this is Marie, and thank you for joining me for Creative Techniques. We're going to be using a Cherry Lynn die today and creating a beautiful gardenia flower. This is called Gardenia Strip. As you can see, it's one plate, and it will yield 3 large petals. The fourth petal is smaller, and then a very small one for the very center. And together, this will create a gardenia flower. Now I use a molding pad to help create dimension in my flowers. It's a very soft pad and a molding tool. I believe these are McGill. Any molding tools will work. And I'm going to use some ink. This is a Tim Holtz Vintage Photo Distress, or you can use Desert Sand Memento. And I use Sukaniko Dauber. It's much loved, as you can tell. I've used it for a long time. I have one to match just about every one of my sets of ink. Now I'm sponging the very edges of my flower. It doesn't take a lot of ink, just a little something that will distress it. And what this process will do is to allow that flower to pop by adding more dimension. And it looks a little more finished. You don't have just a white edge. And again, it doesn't take much, just a tiny little bit will do the trick. Just continue that process and sponge all those petals. I think this color Vintage Photo is one of my very favorite. I use it for my cards, my projects. I have a lot of ink, but this one is my very favorite go-to ink of all. I think it just has a very beautiful brown to it. You'll notice if you use the Memento Desert Sand, you get a very nice effect with that as well. It's just a little bit lighter in color, and particularly for the video purpose, I wanted to make sure that you could see what the color looked like. I think this is just a beautiful distress on the edges of the petals. Now, in addition to that, you will be actually molding and breaking down the paper fibers to create this flower. And there are usually several steps to doing this, but with this particular petal or flower, we're going to do mostly the molding technique. And that's where you're just taking the ball end of your molding tool and rubbing it over the paper very lightly and just allowing it to break down the fiber. You'll notice how it's gently cupping the flower, and it's becoming softer, and it has a shape to it. You'll flip it over and just put a little pressure in the very center, and that will allow it to have a nice little bend and curve to your petal. Again, flip over your petal to where the shaded part is on the bottom, and break down the fiber. And when you flip it over, to put a little shape to the very center. Then that will become the top of your petal, so you can then see the little shaded edge or distressed edges. Again, start with the bottom, the underside of your petal, breaking down the fiber, and continue the process. Before I assemble, I like to curl my edges a little, add a little bit more dimension. And I'm just using the handle of a paintbrush. You can use anything you have on hand. And I'm going to take a little glue. Any paper glue will work. Apply a little bit to one petal and overlap. Creates a nice little petal. And we will continue the process with the one in the center. This work is a little smaller, and we're going to overlap a little more. Now, if you wanted to just have a center of petal, then you would you could overlap and make it smaller, or even roll it. But I'm just shaping it a little as that glue dries. Just shaping it into a kind of a tight petal, but I like to put a pearl in there sometime. So I'm going to have mine a little looser. Now, as we adhere or assemble our layers, make sure that you have your petal offset, not directly one on top of the other. Offset the petals just slightly. And as you're applying your next petal, continue to offset each layer just slightly. Away from the other one, so that you just don't have one petal just laying right on top of the other. I always like to take my hands and gently shape the petal, giving it some dimension. You know, flowers are not flat in nature. So your flowers will want to have some dimension to it. So just continue to gently shape your flower as you go. And this is our last one. And you have your little gardenia. I wanted to demonstrate what it would look like if you used a different colored cardstock and make maybe a different kind of a flower. I just put together and showed you what it would be like if you applied any kind of a generic leaf, and I just put a rose leaf. There's a sample. Now this is to show you what to do if you want a smaller flower. You don't have to make a gardenia. I used 2 petals from the Gardenia Strip, a large and a small. Repeat the process and you have a flower that's smaller and would be suitable for a smaller focal image. Now, as you can see, the flower on the right has a little more shading and distress. The one on the left did not have distress. So you can see how it really pops it up to add that little bit of color. I hope you have fun with this and give it a try. Thank you so much for viewing this tutorial.